You know what's crazy? There's a World War II veteran who swears he was part of a mission involving Hitler that nobody talks about. Not in the history books. Not in the documentaries. Nowhere. And what he saw that day still haunts him. Listen, I know what you're thinking. Another conspiracy theory, right? But this guy passed multiple lie detector tests. His story lines up with declassified documents that only came out decades later. And the details he remembers are so specific, so bizarre, that you can't just brush it off. So let me tell you about James McKinley, a name you've probably never heard before, because for over 60 years, he couldn't tell anyone what really happened. James was just 23 years old when he got pulled from his unit in 1945. No explanation, no warning, just orders to report to a tent on the outskirts of a small German town the Allies had just taken. He thought maybe he was in trouble. Maybe someone found out about the extra rations he'd been trading. But when he walked into that tent, he knew immediately this was something different. There were 5 other soldiers there. None of them knew each other, all from different units, different backgrounds. And standing at the front of the tent was a British intelligence officer who didn't bother with introductions. Just got straight to business. You 6 have been selected for a mission that does not officially exist, the officer said. If you succeed, no one will ever know. If you fail, we'll deny you ever work for us. James said his stomach dropped right there. Because in war, when someone tells you a mission doesn't officially exist, you know you're about to do something that could get you killed in ways that won't be quick or clean. The officer explained that they had intelligence suggesting Hitler was planning to escape Berlin through a secret tunnel system. Not the bunker everyone knows about now. A completely different network that led to a private airfield outside the city. Their job was simple on paper. Infiltrate the area. Confirm the intelligence. And if they found Hitler trying to escape, they were to capture him alive. Capture, not kill. That part stuck with James. Because by that point in the war, everyone wanted Hitler dead. The idea that command wanted him alive didn't make sense. They had 48 hours to prepare. They were given German uniforms. SS uniforms, specifically. James said wearing that uniform made him physically sick. The eagle, the skull, everything that represented the evil they'd been fighting against. But that was the only way they'd get close enough without being shot on sight. They also got false papers, new identities. James became Wilhelm Schneider, a supply officer from Munich. They drilled him on his backstory until he could recite it in his sleep. Where he grew up, his fake family, his fake job before the war. Everything. The night before the mission, James couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about his real family back in Ohio. His mom who baked pies every Sunday. His dad who worked at the steel mill. His little sister who wrote him letters about her new boyfriend. He wondered if he'd ever see them again. They left before dawn, traveled in a captured German truck through roads that were barely roads anymore. Just mud and rubble and the burnt-out shells of buildings. The closer they got to Berlin, the worse it looked. Entire neighborhoods reduced to nothing. Bodies still in the streets. The smell of death everywhere. Their contact met them 10 miles outside the city. A German defector who'd been working with British intelligence for months. He gave them updated maps of the tunnel system and one piece of information that changed everything. Hitler wasn't planning to escape. He was already gone. According to the defector, Hitler had left the bunker 3 days earlier through the tunnels. But here's where it gets strange. He didn't go to the airfield. He went to a compound in the countryside that supposedly didn't exist. A place the defector called Das Versteck. The hideout. The mission changed right there. They weren't preventing an escape anymore. They were tracking someone who'd already escaped. And command still wanted him alive. James said they argued about it. One of the soldiers, a guy from Texas named Rodriguez, said they should abort. This wasn't what they signed up for. But the British officer who'd briefed them had made it clear. Once you're in, you're in. There's no backing out of a mission that doesn't exist. So they went, followed the defector through the tunnel system that honestly sounded like something out of a nightmare. Miles of underground passages, some parts so narrow they had to crawl. No lights except the ones they carried. Water dripping from the ceiling. Rats everywhere. James said he'd never felt fear like that. Not in combat. Not when he was under fire. Because at least in combat, you can see what's trying to kill you. Down there in those tunnels, every shadow could be an enemy. Every sound could be someone waiting to ambush them. They walked for hours. The defector knew the way, but even he seemed nervous. Kept checking his map, kept stopping to listen. At one point, they heard voices up ahead. German voices. They had to hide in a side passage while a group of SS officers passed by. James said he held his breath so long he thought he'd pass out. One of those officers stopped right where they were hiding. Lia Cigarette stood there for what felt like forever before moving on. When they finally came out of the tunnels, they were in the middle of a forest. Dense trees, no roads, no signs of civilization, just woods that went on forever. The defector led them to a ridge overlooking a valley, and that's where James saw it. The compound. It wasn't huge, maybe a dozen buildings, but it was heavily fortified. Guard towers, barbed wire, soldiers patrolling with dogs. And in the center of it all, a large house that looked almost normal, like someone's country estate, except for all the armed men surrounding it. The defector pointed to the house and said that's where Hitler was. Inside that house, right now, James and the others set up a position in the woods where they could watch the compound without being seen. They were supposed to observe for 24 hours, map out the defenses, figure out a way to get in and out. But only 4 hours into their observation, something happened that nobody expected. Hitler came outside. James said he'll never forget that moment. Seeing the man who'd started the war that killed millions of people. The man whose face was on every propaganda poster. Just standing there in the afternoon sun like he was on vacation. He wasn't alone. There were 2 other men with him. One James recognized immediately from the intelligence photos they'd been shown. Martin Bormann, Hitler's right-hand man. The other guy, James had no idea who he was. But all 3 of them seemed relaxed, talking, almost laughing. That's when Rodriguez whispered what they were all thinking. We could take the shot right now. And they could have. James was the designated marksman. He had a clear line of sight. 1 bullet and the war's architect would be gone. But orders were orders. Capture, not kill. They watched for another hour. Hitler and the 2 men went back inside. Guards changed shifts. Everything seemed routine. That's when the defector said something that made James's blood run cold. They're planning to move him tonight. How'd he know? The defector had contacts inside the compound. People who were feeding information to the Allies. And according to those contacts, Hitler was only staying here temporarily. Tonight, he'd be moved to another location, somewhere even more hidden. If they didn't act now, they'd lose him forever. The team had to make a choice. Wait for reinforcements that might not arrive in time, or go in now with just 6 men against a fortified compound full of SS soldiers. James said they voted. 4 wanted to go in, 2 wanted to wait. But the 4 won, and they started planning an assault that by all logic should have gotten them killed. Their advantage was surprise. The compound wasn't expecting an attack. Why would they? As far as the Germans knew, the Allies had no idea this place existed. The defector said there was a weak point in the perimeter, a section of fence that the guards didn't watch as closely because it faced the densest part of the forest. They waited until dark. No moon that night, which helped. They moved slowly through the woods, careful not to make noise. James said his heart was pounding so hard he thought the guards would hear it. The fence was exactly where the defector said it would be. They cut through the wire. One by one, they slipped inside. And that's when everything went wrong. Dogs started barking. Lights came on. Sirens blared. Someone had seen them, or heard them, or maybe they tripped some kind of alarm the defector didn't know about. Gunfire erupted from the guard towers. One of the soldiers, a kid from Boston named Murphy, got hit immediately. Went down hard. Rodriguez dragged him behind a building while the rest of them returned fire. James said it was chaos. Pure chaos. They were supposed to be a stealth team, and now they were in a full firefight. But here's the thing. They were better trained than the guards. Better shots. And the guards weren't expecting resistance. They were used to guarding a compound that nobody knew existed. The team fought their way toward the main house, taking out guards, moving from cover to cover. James said his training took over. He wasn't thinking anymore, just reacting, shooting, moving, staying alive. They reached the house. The front door was reinforced, so they went through a window. Inside, it was surprisingly quiet. Like the fighting outside didn't matter. Expensive furniture, paintings on the walls. It looked like a museum, not a hiding place for the most wanted man in the world. They cleared the first floor. Nothing. Moved to the second floor. That's where they found him. Hitler was in a study, sitting at a desk, not running, not fighting, just sitting there with a pistol in his hand. And James said the look on his face wasn't fear. It was something else, something James couldn't quite describe. Maybe resignation, maybe relief. Rodriguez pointed his rifle at Hitler and shouted at him to drop the weapon. For a second, James thought Hitler was going to shoot himself right there. His hand moved like he was raising the pistol to his head. But then he stopped, looked at them, and said something in German. None of them spoke German except the defector, who'd stayed outside to cover their escape. But James remembered the words. He wrote them down later. Es ist vorbei. It's over. Hitler dropped the gun, put his hands up, and just like that, they'd done it. They'd captured Adolf Hitler. But then Bormann appeared from a side door with 2 guards. Opened fire. Hit one of James's teammates in the chest. The guy, a soldier from California named Shun, died instantly. The firefight in that study lasted maybe 30 seconds. James and Rodriguez killed the guards. Bormann took a bullet to the leg and went down. In the chaos, Hitler ran, just bolted out of the room. James chased it down a hallway, into another room, and that's where things got strange. The room was full of documents, files stacked everywhere, maps on the walls. But what caught James's attention was what Hitler was doing. He wasn't trying to escape. He was trying to burn the documents. There was a fireplace, and he was shoving papers into it as fast as he could. James grabbed him, pulled him away from the fireplace. Hitler was shouting in German, desperate, trying to get back to the documents. Like burning them was more important than his own life. Rodriguez came in. They restrained Hitler, used rope they'd brought to tie his hands. And that's when James looked at the documents. He couldn't read German, but he could see maps. Locations marked all over the world. South America, Middle East, even the United States. Rodriguez grabbed a handful of the documents that hadn't burned yet, shoved them in his pack. They needed to get out. The compound was in full alert. More guards were coming. They could hear vehicles approaching. They dragged Hitler down the stairs. Out through the window they'd come in. Murphy was dead. They'd lost Chun. They were down to 4 soldiers, 1 defector, and the most important prisoner of the war. The escape was a nightmare, fighting their way back to the fence. Germans everywhere. James got shot in the shoulder, but barely felt it. Adrenaline kept him moving. They made it to the woods, started running. Behind them, the whole compound was lit up. Dogs barking, men shouting, trucks racing through the forest. They ran for miles. Hitler couldn't keep up. They had to half-carry him. The defector led them to a safe house, a barn owned by a German family who'd been helping the Allies. They hid there while search parties passed by. James said he's never been so scared. They were deep behind enemy lines with the Führer himself as a prisoner. If they got caught, death would be a mercy. They stayed in that barn for 2 days, waiting for the search to die down. Hitler didn't speak much, just sat there in the corner, staring at nothing. James said it was surreal. This man who'd commanded armies, who'd conquered countries, now just a tired old man tied up in a barn. On the 3rd day, they moved. The defector had arranged transport, a truck that would take them to Allied lines. But they only made it halfway before they were stopped at a checkpoint. German checkpoint. James thought it was over, but the defector talked to the guards, showed them fake papers, and somehow, impossibly, they were waved through. They reached Allied lines just before dawn on the 4th day. American soldiers at first didn't believe what they were seeing, had to call up the chain of command. Within an hour, the area was swarming with officers. Intelligence. MPs. They took Hitler away. James never saw him again. They also took the documents Rodriguez had grabbed, told the team they'd done good work. Then came the order that changed everything. This mission never happened. You were never here. You never saw Hitler. You tell anyone about this, you'll be court-martialed for spreading false information. James said he was confused. They just captured Hitler. Why would command deny it? But the British intelligence officer who'd briefed them explained. The official story was that Hitler died in Berlin. killed himself in the bunker. If the world found out he'd actually escaped and been captured alive, it would cause chaos. People would lose faith in the official narrative. It would validate every conspiracy theory. So the capture had to stay secret. The team was split up, sent to different units, told never to contact each other again. James finished the war in France, came home in 1946, married his sweetheart, had 3 kids, worked in a factory for 40 years, and never told anyone what happened. But in 2003, some documents got declassified, not about the mission specifically, but about Hitler's last days. And James saw something in those documents, a reference to a compound in the countryside, a mention of a failed escape attempt, details that matched what he'd experienced. That's when he decided to come forward. He was 81 years old, figured he'd probably die soon anyway. What were they going to do? Court-martial a dying man. He told his story to a journalist, took a lie detector test, passed, took another one, passed again. The official response? Denial. The Department of Defense said there was no record of such a mission, no record of James McKinley being part of any special operation. The journalist who interviewed him tried to find the other soldiers from the team. Rodriguez was dead, killed in a car accident in 1967. The others had vanished, changed their names, disappeared into civilian life. But here's what keeps this story alive. The documents Rodriguez grabbed from that room? James said he saw them briefly before they were confiscated. One of them showed locations all over the world, places where high-ranking Nazis could hide if Germany fell. And in the decades after the war, Nazi war criminals were found in many of those exact locations. Argentina, Paraguay, Syria, places marked on those maps. Was Hitler captured alive? Did he die in that compound? Did he escape again after James and his team brought him in? We'll probably never know the full truth. James McKinley died in 2007. For years after telling his story, he maintained until his last breath that everything he said was true, that he'd looked Adolf Hitler in the eyes, that he'd captured the man responsible for World War II, and that the official history we're taught is missing one crucial chapter. The thing is, we know governments keep secrets. We know operations get classified for decades. We know the official story of history isn't always the complete story. So maybe James was telling the truth. Maybe there's a file somewhere in a government archive that confirms everything he said. Or maybe it's just the story of an old man trying to make sense of a war that haunted him for 60 years. But I'll tell you what keeps me up at night. It's not whether James McKinley was lying. It's what else might be hidden. What other missions never officially happened? What other secrets are still classified? What other parts of history do we have completely wrong? Because if one old veteran can pass multiple lie detector tests about capturing Hitler, and if his story lines up with documents that eventually got declassified, and if his details are too specific to be made up, then what else don't we know? What other impossible stories might actually be true?